Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kylie. I'm a partner with 30 years experience in professional services, and the past 22 years of those have been with Pitcher Partners Queensland and our private business and family advisory division. And today I'm joined by Robert.
Thanks, Kylie. Hi, I'm Robert Prince. I'm a director of Pitcher Partners Wealth WA. I spend a lot of time working with our private business network and tend to be at the forefront of our succession planning here in the Perth practice. I'm really hoping you enjoy some of the insights we have to overlay on the radar report.
Now, before we begin today, we'd just like to remind you to use the Q&A box for any questions during the webinar and remind you that we'll be sharing the links to these slides and the recording of this session on Monday. As we gather for this virtual event and are physically dispersed, we do wish to recognise the various traditional lands on which we do business today. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we work and live on and pay respect to past, present and emerging generations. Now, succession planning has been a trending subject in Australia's middle market of recent times and is a focus of Business Radar report for September 2024. Pitcher Partners Business Radar is all about hearing the voice of the middle market businesses in Australia. In our effort to capture that voice, we surveyed 142 middle market leaders and business owners across Australia to find out how they're planning to hand over the reins to the next generation. Hopefully, you've all already had an opportunity to read our latest Business Radar report. However, if you have not, it is available on our website, so please have a look at www.pitcher.com.au. So Robert, before we get into succession planning in more detail, I think it's really important we clarify what we mean by succession planning for the purposes of our webinar today.
Thanks, Kylie. I think the distinction is important because succession planning means different things to different people. I also find that when looking at the results, the definition was important in some of the survey respondents had to say, and some of those results actually surprised me. For this report, we've defined succession planning as the process of preparing for a transfer of business ownership or identifying and growing talent to fill business critical positions in the future. When I reflect on that, a lot of people that I meet regarding succession planning tend to view it as retirement. Now, retirement can be a trigger for succession planning, or it may be a goal, but it is not succession planning in itself. There's a couple of disclaimers that I do need to go through, as always with a presentation like this. Anything Kylie and I have to say has been prepared for information and discussion purposes, along with the slides. The information is general in nature, has not been prepared without taking into consideration your objectives, circumstances, financial situation, or particular needs. So the presentation does not constitute personal advice. Furthermore to this, I'm also licensed through Century Advice, and Pitcher Partners Wealth WA is a separate and standalone business and an authorised representative of Century Advice. The reason for this distinction, I think the reason why I spend time on disclaimers is I'm hoping the conversation you find is insightful, and I'm hoping that we can trigger a couple of things that you will want to go away and talk about with your professional advisors in relation to your circumstances, but in no way is any of this commentary to be taken as personal advice. Now let's start at having a look at why we're having this conversation in the first place. And it all very much comes down to demographics. Australia's population is ageing. If we look at the baby boomer generation, they were born between 1946 and 1964. So they are now aged 60 to 78 years of age. And, you know, God giving, hopefully they're going to be living a lot longer. But it does mean that those Gen Xers who were born between 1965 and 1979, whilst expecting to inherit a significant amount of wealth, they're also facing the prospect of their own succession planning needs as they're approaching age 60. I kind of feel that it's going to be the millennials that benefit throughout this whole process. If we look at the numbers, in 2002, less than $60 billion was transferred from one generation to another. Yet within 16 years' time, that had doubled by 2018. If we look at the Australian Government Productivity Commission research paper, they're sort of forecasting that by 2050, there'll be $3.5 trillion being transferred from one generation to the next. And this will be comprised of residential property, unspent superannuation, and other investments. I kind of take other investments to mean businesses. That's what we're here to talk about, and also facilitating that you have the right leadership in those businesses to carry them forward. It also means that over the next 25 years, there's going to be a lot of conversations that need to be had, either in the boardroom, around the coffee table, or in the lunchroom, as to what happens next. Moving forward, this is not the first time that Pitcher Partners has surveyed the market for their views on succession planning. If I look back at 2021, when we did conduct a survey, 58% of businesses had never engaged in succession planning. Of those that had, they were either in the mature or growth stage of their business, and they were certainly more confident in their outlook. This intuitively makes sense. However, when I come across a lot of businesses, I always have this phrase of start with the end in mind. You want to make sure that you've got the right structures and you're building the right leadership team along the way. And hopefully by doing that, that will help progress your succession in the later years. Well, we asked our respondents regarding what their outcomes were for succession planning. 40% were developing it for their staff and management in terms of a transition. And this very much speaks to the culture that you build within a business. I like to say culture is everything. A business is a small community of people coming together to develop something, and it kind of heartwarming in a way that the business owners want to develop this and foster this. 36% were trying to aim at extracting value and sale readiness. And that is a goal that you've been building something, your final outcome is a dollar value that you can then go and proceed to do something else. So we don't view succession as a finite thing. Quite often it's the start of a new beginning. And then we had 32% of businesses wanting to leave a legacy, whether that's a strong brand name, whether it's being able to pass it on to their own children, or just providing that financial literacy for the next generation, and then having a quantum of money that they can use their time for giving back to society. Also, in reflecting at these numbers, I kind of feel that the reason why the number of people that had never engaged in succession planning was so high is that, it was sort of the period of coming out of COVID-19. And so people were more focused on just having their business running efficiently, managing staff and supply lines, as opposed to that longer term thinking. If we look now to the results of the latest radar, we can see that 57% of people have a plan, or businesses have a plan. But let's put that in the context of the number of businesses we're expecting to change and the ownership of those. We've got 40% of SMEs are owned by the baby boomer generation. So that's that 60 to 78-year-old generation. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. There's plenty of clients that I have in their late 70s and 80s that are still owning a business and mentoring the future leaders of those businesses. What I do find interesting, if we have 1 million business owners planning on exiting the next 10 years, then there's probably 430,000 business owners that need to be having a conversation about what that transition looks like, not just for them, but for their staff that they're trying to cultivate. Probably not necessarily concerning, but there's a small group that feel they don't need to have one. And I'd like to investigate that at some stage, but certainly not as a part of this presentation. Now, sometimes the numbers surprise us. So when we look at the time frame of what people were looking at, we just said, 1 million business owners look at transitioning over the next 10 years. These results here really surprised me. And that's why I wanted to really define what we were looking at in terms of business succession. Because when we talk about business owners, we're normally talking about a longer time frame. When we're talking about cultivating leadership within an organisation, that tends to be a shorter time frame. But what surprised me was this number here: 27% of businesses expect a change in owner or senior leadership in the next 12 months. And that concerns me, because when you're running a business, these leaders have all that intellectual property of knowing how the business runs intimately. They've got the relationships with your suppliers and your customers. And to have that walking out the door in a 12-month period is a little bit scary. When I look at the average being 3.6 years, that also surprised me in that if I'm talking to a business owner, we're normally talking long-term planning of 5, 10, 15 years. And the reason for that is we're quite often trying to build up assets outside of the business to support them in later life. You know, superannuation obviously being one of those, but also we will look at the family dynamic, and there might be assets we need to build up for children that aren't going to continue on in the business. So as I said, the number surprised me, but I think part of it is because we're trying to cultivate the people around us, and a lot of that is probably happening now for just the future growth of businesses. We refer to it as the silver tsunami, but I think Kyle would probably agree with me that it's happening now. If we look at what some of these triggers are coming through, when do we start thinking of succession planning? Triggers are fairly common terms, but I actually think the trigger, the start of the conversation, is quite often you've had a bad week, right? You're sitting there and thinking, what I'm doing, you know, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? You start questioning it. So that's normally a trigger. It's also a case of you've got a new idea and you just want to know how to implement that. So change of business strategy means bringing in other people to help you implement that strategy, or it may mean that you're looking for another organisation to help take you to that next level. And that's where I'm looking at business succession is not necessarily an exit strategy, it's the start of something new. One of the main triggers is the exit of a leader or retirement, and we like to think that you're building the staff and leadership mechanisms around within your organisation to deal with that. We also like to feel that you've got the internal mentorship programs to look after your up-and-coming staff. What we look at is that as a trigger. We also look at trying to make sure that we've got staff engaged in terms of the firm's future. So we might start talking then about employee share plans for smaller organisations and making sure that they're structured properly. Financial pressures and distress come about for all sorts of reasons, but sometimes we're just growing too quickly, or sometimes we need to be looking at new ideas and branching out into a different area that does need new talent coming into the business or does need more capital coming in to develop the business. So one of the main benefits we see is this opportunity to grow. It's a start of new beginnings. And to help foster that, there's been a lot of popular press about artificial intelligence. And I look at the baby boomer generation. I'm a Gen X. I still struggle with technology. I'm not saying the baby boomers are bad at it, but they weren't brought up with it. So if you're looking at innovative processes, having the millennials come through, that younger generation that have grown up with technology, they're not afraid of it, and they're probably more willing to embrace it to bring through enhancements with new ideas. A couple of other benefits that aren't on the screen that we look at is quite often business owners have had a very successful career in building something and they want to give back. So they might want to set up their own private ancillary fund or do philanthropic work or community work in giving back. But they also want to be able to provide that future financial acumen of business to their leaders or to their children. Now, moving on, if we look at how succession planning is impacted by the size of the firm, this seems intuitively correct to me in that for businesses with turnover of less than 10 million or less than 100 employees, when you're running a business of this size, you tend to be the business owner with a manager. You are just busy. You are wearing so many hats. You're the marketing manager, you're the HR person, you're the COO, you're the CFO, and you're so busy in the business, you don't have time to step back and plan. So to see that only 45% and 44% have planned makes sense. The other thing that we see in these size businesses is they tend to be family owned. And by being family owned, there's this just general thought process, quite often unspoken, that the next generation's working the business and will come through and look after the business. That is still subject to having to have a conversation, because I've certainly been in circumstances where the kids are working in a business to support mum and dad, but if they had the option, they probably would have been off doing something else. And I've certainly seen it when mum and dad have actually retired from the business, the kids have actually sold it and moved on to do what they actually had an aspiration to do. The sweet spot for succession planning seems to be those businesses between 100 and 200 employees or turnover of 10 million. And this is because you start seeing the ability to free up time for senior management. You do have that, you do have the resources and the different roles of a HR manager, a marketing person, a CFO, CEO type roles, that the actual leadership team can put effort into that longer term strategic planning, and they can actually make that effort to step back and see what is the direction of this business and what do we want to achieve out of it. The numbers fall away as we get larger, and I tend to feel that's because you get to this, at some point with a big organisation, you get this separation of control between who's running the business. So you've got the leaders and your managers, but the ownership is separate. So you might have a board of directors overseeing the overall direction of the company, but then you're looking more at a corporate size entity. And so your exit strategy is probably more likely to be a sale, because you can extract a more quantifiable value and you can get a higher multiple from what you're doing. Now let's have a look at what some of these barriers are to succession planning, because it's quite good that people are having the conversation. I'm actually going to go into a bit of depth with this slide. The main barrier seems to be time, right? I don't have enough time to commit to the succession plan, and succession plan to me is a process, so it does take time. It's not something you just set up and forget about, and people do need to be cultivated. Succession is too far away. Well, if you leave it till a year or two out to try and find the right leadership team, you're probably leaving it too late. The other items below, though, are quite interesting in that you're not comfortable having the conversation. So that's almost a third. That's a big number. And the conversation normally starts at home with a spouse or a friend or a trusted advisor. Not knowing where to start, I certainly understand that, which is 9%, but also not knowing what to do. And that probably speaks a little bit more to retirement. So I'll go through an example whereby I had a client come and see me a number of years ago. They were a couple in their early 50s, and they didn't know where to start. They were actually referred to me regarding some superannuation advice. They had a business that had paid off all their debts. They weren't looking to expand, but it was spitting out a lot of cash flow. And so they thought, all right, let's start building up some super. Came and saw me. They were more focused on the tax deductions than building an asset outside of their business. The conversation progressed just through open-ended conversations. So I just asked, what are your broader plans for the business? What are you thinking of in terms of your children that are working in the business? And from there, the conversation, which was started out as superannuation, ended up being about what their longer term goals and objectives were. So that they found somebody to talk to, and they were comfortable talking to that person, being a professional advisor. And that kind of worked for them because it was somebody outside of the business that they could talk to openly and provide a bit of insight to what they've seen with previous examples of succession planning. Because we've all heard of disaster stories in succession planning, but it's nice to hear some good ones along the way. I then had the clients come back in, and I provided basically a balance sheet of all their assets. So not just the entity they're operating through, I put in all their private assets as well. And then we discussed about their longer term, not just succession plan, but their estate plan. And we drew up on the whiteboard all their different entities and how they were interrelated. And this is where time is your friend. So whilst it's a barrier, time to me allows me as an advisor and allows the business owners to structure their affairs appropriately for a future succession. So it means they've got time to cultivate the right staff, whether it's children or other leaders within the business. It means we've got time to build up assets outside of the business, whether it be superannuation or other trusts. So in this case, the couple, they had 4 children. 2 children were continuing on in the business and 2 children had separate careers and were quite happy doing that. We had a meeting with the children. As part of that process, we set up 2 trusts for the children not in the business. And what we started doing was, with some of that cash flow being generated by the business, because the business was the largest asset in the family group, we started building up these 2 trusts for the other children. And we set them up with a corporate trustee. The child and the father were the directors. So this feeds into that financial business acumen we want the children to learn. And the children knew that in the future, this was going to be something that they could direct. We left the father as the appointer for ultimate control. So as this succession plan progressed, we had a line in the sand, a future date whereby mum and dad were stepping back from the business. So the business owners were saying, okay, you guys in the business, you run it your way. You've had enough time to learn. We've appointed an independent chair to just provide you with advice outside of the parents' advice. The problem became was, what's dad going to do? Didn't like golf, doesn't like fishing. He was really concerned. So we went back and spoke to the kids and saying, look, is there any roles here that you find appropriate for your father to fill in without him being a burden or butting heads within the business? And as we transitioned, it became actually really nice that the father found out he could go in 3 days a week, still work in the business in designated roles, but the existing staff that he'd worked with over the years still respected him and wanted his advice, and the kids just enjoyed having him around as well. So what we perceive as barriers can actually be part of your trigger, but it's the benefit, it's having time. And the other thing that we come across quite often that time allows us to do is, with a family-owned business or a private business, there's normally Div 7A loans involved that we need to unwind. We might find that we want to get a structure in place so that we can offer an employee share plan. We do want the senior leadership team to have ownership and skin in the game in that business. Now, this talks to me about being opportunity ready, so that when succession planning comes about, we know what we're looking for, but we're in a position to take advantage of it. I actually love this slide because to me it talks about business efficiency, but opportunity ready is also a mindset. So we look for a strong management team. This talks to culture, having people embedded in the business, having the ability to grow and foster the future of your business. It talks about the appropriate structuring. So as I said, being able to do that employee share plan and reward those good business leaders to have them sticky within the business. The corporate records and financial forecasts, we want them to be robust and be able to stand up to due diligence, because a succession plan can be derailed by something out of left field. And that may be you see an opportunity for a merger with another organisation to grow your business. It may mean that you get offered a takeover offer out of the blue. Now, to do that, you need your accounts to be able to stand up for scrutiny. So having them possibly audited, depending on the size of the organisation and where you're at, makes that a lot easier and a lot more seamless. It also means, from an opportunity-ready perspective, if you need to raise capital, it's a lot easier to do and a lot quicker to do, whether that be through equity from a third party or you're talking to the bank and need additional funding. If you're doing all these things, hopefully you're running a lean balance sheet and you are maximising your earnings. Now, that's probably enough from me, so I'll hand over to Kylie for now, and I'll join you at the end of this presentation for the Q&A. But thank you for listening to me, and welcome Kylie again.
Thanks, Robert. So where to from here? The succession conversation's been started, and we want to be opportunity ready. The reality is your business succession strategy may actually vary during your lifetime of your business as your goals, size, and nature of business changes. Let's work through some of the most common strategies we are seeing playing out in the middle market And I'm going to dovetail these stats with some of our collective leadership insights. So 20% of mid-sized businesses are planning to transfer their business to family. Now, this is a really common strategy where the goal is to maintain the family legacy. However, there are challenges, including preparing the successor for leadership and potentially handling family disputes. The successor may choose to gift the business to the family members or place it in a trust. Trusts can be advantageous by passing control, and it can ensure that the business remains in the family, but it is really critical the new owners undertake careful planning and legal structuring. We are noticing second and third generation businesses may not actually see the fourth family generation take it over, so alternative succession strategies may need to be explored. Our results also indicated 19% of internal candidates will replace existing leaders. Now, practically, this could be facilitated by management buyout, which Robert's touched on. The strategy ensures continuity as the team already knows how the business operates, and this strategy may actually minimise disruptions. It's often used where the owner trusts the management to lead the company into the future. Sometimes we see the application of employee share ownership plans as another way to bring internal candidates through by transitioning ownership to the workforce. Growth and succession often go hand in hand. These employee share ownership plans and management buyouts can motivate active contributors from the outset to give them a direct stake in the success and growth of the business. Now, 15% of our respondents anticipated that they will be bought out by existing owners. Now, depending on the legal structure, a buy-sell agreement is often an effective strategy to provide certainty for particular trigger events. This legally binding contract ensures that in the event of a partner's death, retirement, or incapacity, the remaining business partners have the right to buy out the departing partner's share. 12% of owners selling the businesses are keen to stay in a leadership role for a period of time. Now, a mechanism to do this may be to consider an earn-out arrangement, especially where their leadership role is very critical to the transition of key relationships. 10% of businesses will have external leaders replace the existing leaders. Now, we are seeing this through some deals and activity in the marketplace for this quarter. This is usually facilitated through a broker, advisor, or investment bank, especially when seeking the best financial return. Challenges can kick in when the new owner might introduce changes in management or direction. Merger or acquisition is still a very popular strategy. This can provide financial benefits, synergies, and a smoother transition in cases where the acquirer has experience in the same industry. Mergers are also a very popular way to fast-track growth strategy for the acquirer in a resource-constrained environment. Public listing or IPO is also another strategy. This strategy is actually usually reserved for larger businesses and can generate significant capital, but also bring regulatory and public accountability. Liquidation is also an option where maybe there is no successor available or simply succession of the business is not feasible. The owner might choose to liquidate and close the business, selling off the company's assets, distributing the proceeds to shareholders or creditors. The evolution of business might result in moving from an active business to actually realizing alternative use of a business assets. For example, a business might have evolved into a commercial property business. Each business succession strategy has its own implications for taxation, employee retention, company culture, and the business's long-term viability. Ultimately, the choice depends on the leader's or the owner's priorities, whether maximizing value, preserving legacy, or ensuring operational continuity. So let's move on to explore the benefits with risk and change. There are benefits with changes in ownership and leadership, and of course there is no growth without risk. How the business was driven in the past may not work for the business in the future. I want to step you through a simple case study to demonstrate these results. Let's take my business owner who was in his late 60s, who passed control of the family business to 3 sons, the second generation, about 12 years ago. The first thing the sons did was ask for Dad's blessing to change advisors, as Dad's advisors were actually retiring themselves. Dad agreed it was a great idea for the advisors to outlive the owners, but also what they needed 20 years ago from their advisors is very different to what the sons needed to take the business to the next level. There was never going to be a third generation family business owner, so the sons in their early 40s actually started planning for their own succession as soon as they took over. However, to achieve what the sons had in mind and to make Dad proud, there was a significant injection of capital that was going to be required, and none of them were really comfortable committing to that. They actually started focusing on replacing themselves and formalizing roles as a CEO, the Chief Financial Controller, and the Chief Marketing Officer, which they actually achieved in about 5 to 6 years while doubling their staff base. Working on the business and less in the business was their motto. It is really common for family-owned businesses to have deeply connected personal and business identities. During this time and this process, it enabled them to create some time to focus on their own future personal transition and to start to let go. The sons in that time made the business attractive for sale without a heavy handcuff on themselves. They then sold for cash and script into a larger business. This then enabled them to realize their goals and dreams to be a national business with their brand recognized. They were able to drive growth, expand business lines, and leverage resources. This business then listed. The last 5 years in the industry sector meant that they could reach the heights, but not necessarily resent each other or break themselves to do it or risk too much capital. They were able to leverage the technological advances. Their product grew nationally and internationally. They stayed for several years after listing to ensure that their loyal staff base would be well looked after. The planned succession from the original founder to his sons then took 12 years in 2 phases. The original founder was actually thrilled with what was achieved and particularly proud of the economic contribution to the Eastern Seaboard. So whilst there are benefits, there are always measured and considered risks. The risk of succession links strongly to the benefits. The top risk is the impact of a change in a strategic direction. If you don't prepare your leadership team for the transition, this can have a terrible domino effect with reputational damage, lack of buy-in, disengagement, and loss of relationship with key clients and suppliers, not to mention harmony within the family. In recent years, we have seen the exponential growth for the need to upskill later generations in sustained technological advancements, as this can truly harm future business success if left too late. Merging can be problematic as cultures and values may not align, and the unintentional consequence is that the lack of harmony and possibly losing people due to culture. So while 25% feel there is a risk with the lack of clear leadership, our research indicates that 52% of leaders of mature businesses see succession as a real opportunity for growth. Now, to recap on the priorities for business preparing for change. There is a clear standout and focus on people and culture when we analyse mature businesses and growth in the growth stage. Navigating the risk of a change in strategic direction alongside a change in leadership style demands a focus on people. 47% of our respondents said that they focused on preparing staff for change through people and culture reviews. There is no leadership succession unless your people buy into it, and poor culture will create operational challenges and trigger financial impact. There's no surprise mature businesses need new ideas and people to move them into a growth mindset. The leadership team's ability to navigate change management is absolutely critical. Succession communicated early with good change management will encourage harmony during business succession. Now, let's move on to how to design your own roadmap for a business succession process. As Robert and I have touched on, there can be many triggers for business succession planning. Ideally, owners and leaders want to ensure liquidity to enable flex in circumstances when the business needs to pivot. A good business succession process should enable you to accommodate contingency plans where business owners and key management are unwell, die, divorce, or need to exit. It's so important you engage professional advisors in your conversations to be supported in this process. The first step is to identify your goals and vision. Define the future direction of the business and personal goals for the planned transition. If there is no clear plan, it can result in confusion, leadership gaps, and chaos. Step 2, select your successors. Choose potential successors from family, key employees, or external candidates based on skills, experience, and commitment. For example, family ties or seniority may not be in the best interests of the business. Often external recruitment may be needed to fill in critical gaps. Step 3, assess the business value. Obtain a professional valuation of the business to guide financial planning for the stakeholders. Transitioning ownership, especially in a family business, often involves complex financial issues covering taxes, valuation disputes, equity distributions, and they can all complicate planning. Whatever you do, don't underestimate the time to transfer leadership and ownership. Allow a gradual transition of responsibilities. Step 4, develop the succession plan. Outline the roles, responsibilities, and transition timelines for key leadership and staff. Draft a detailed plan outlining the steps for leadership transition, timelines, and specific responsibilities. Include provisions for unexpected departures, whether it's illness, death, or unforeseen circumstances. Step 5, create a coaching training plan for key leaders and staff. Prepare the successors through mentoring, shadowing, and formal training. Step 6, review and establish legal and financial structures as needed. Succession planning can have significant tax and legal consequences. Failure to address can result in unexpected surprises, tax bills, disputes, and liquidity issues. Update your ownership agreements, tax strategies, and legal documents to ensure and plan for a smooth transition. Step 7, communicate the plan. Clearly inform stakeholders, employees, clients, customers, and family about the succession process. Clear communication will help you manage expectations and prevent misunderstandings. In our experience, poorly managed transitions can lead to uncertainty amongst your employees, clients, and investors, potentially affecting business performance, morale, and customer trust. Leaders must balance the need for change with maintaining stability. Step 8, use this as an opportunity to connect with other business owners. Test your thinking and leverage the connectedness with advisors in your network. Putting all the decision-making power or operational responsibility on one successor can overwhelm them or cause bottlenecks. It's better to build a team or multiple leaders to spread that responsibility. Step 9, adjust your plan. Gradually involve the successor in decision-making and make necessary adjustments. Businesses and families are continually evolving, and so should the succession plan. Failure to regularly update it to reflect on changes in business conditions and family dynamics or tax laws can render it ineffective. Ensuring the continued success of the business after the transition is critical. Advisors can help you develop continuity plans, identify risks, and create strategies to maintain stability during and after the ownership change. Step 10, monitor and support the transition. After the handover, continue to offer guidance and support during the transition phase. Owners need to recognise when it's time to step down and trust the new leadership team. Sometimes former family business owners struggle to let go, which can create difficulties for related successors trying to establish themselves. Continuously review and update the plan to reflect changes in business circumstances or personal goals, or simply due to significant business events. In summary, the role of your advisors is critical to support your business succession plan. Now, moving on. Succession planning is a big conversation to navigate, and those involved need to own their role in the succession planning process. Lean into your trusted advisors to avoid the dreaded paralysis and procrastination that can kick in. Our survey results indicate 48% are turning to professional advisors, with nearly 20% expressing that they don't feel like they have a sounding block. Professional isolation is real and particularly prevalent with mid-sized business owners. Often the role of a private business and family advisor is to be a generalist and to help drive the conversation forward. Business succession planning will demand a shift in perspective, as it can be a really vulnerable time of change. However, generally there will be one standout advisor in your circle of advisors who may naturally take the lead as a project manager. When working out this natural lead, traits of adaptability and openness to change management, it is so important. It requires robust conversations to ensure decisions are not made in isolation of other key advisors, being lawyers or financiers. So let's imagine you have a CFO who's been in the family business for 15 to 20 years. This CFO has really only had the family founders as their coach and mentor, and they're in their 60s. This CFO has been liaising with external compliance advisors who have been religiously delivering accounts and tax returns to tick the box each year. However, over the years, the time has never really been set aside for a proper succession conversation with the leaders as a separate agenda item. CFOs may observe the success of the business but not necessarily be privy to the stress and risk of ownership on family business owners' shoulders. Family decision makers, or those reporting into the family are often 45% more likely to experience professional isolation. 60% of decisions are made with the best interests of the business in mind, and 40% of family influences can actually cloud decision making. The role of an external advisor is to provide an outside perspective, an emotional check-in, a way to bounce ideas off each other. So when choosing a good external advisor, really consider how they're also going to engage your CEO and CFO outside of just compliance to support all of those involved in the strategic business succession planning process. A good advisor will share and tap into their own internal and external network of experts to provide thoughtful leadership insights. Now let's move on to how your advisor can help you with cultivating your enduring worth. The first step when contemplating a transaction or selling down equity is understanding timing and tax consequences to the business and the family. Depending on whether it is closely held family business, may even require consideration of a family office for separation and segregation. Cultivating this enduring value can be overwhelming for many middle market businesses. Often the first step in the discussion of succession of equity is, if I sell, what will I have after tax and what is the time frame to achieve that? Often the challenge is to make the deal attractive to the parties we are succeeding to. This conversation triggers a lot of moving parts for the business and often the key leaders and owners. This conversation will have different outcomes for each party who need their own set of independent advisors. A common question is that restructuring may be needed during succession to be more attractive to a future buyer. Business owners often find themselves needing to separate business leadership boards and family boards because they are too closely intertwined and they don't want unconscious bias to set in. Running a family office requires a very different skill set and understanding of family dynamics and may need to be separated from the business activity as part of that process. I think it's really worthwhile to perhaps reflect on who is in your ecosystem of advisors to ensure that the right conversations are front of mind, outside of the typical compliance and tax structuring, which is generally deadline driven and tends to happen seamlessly. So in summary, how do we put success back into succession planning? Take the earlier example of the father and 3 sons and their 2-staged approach with business succession internally, then externally. They took their wishes and turned it into a concrete action plan. The plans for your future may need to be compatible and aligned with the plans you are setting in motion for your business now. The first action, imagine the future and strategize in the present. The first step is to decide what you want for your business in the future and when you ideally want to transition. This vision sets the foundation for all other succession planning decisions, including what you want in a successor. Action 2, spot your successors. Who is going to take over? Make a list of internal and external candidates who could lead your business towards the future you're planning. Consider not just the skills and experience, but the leadership qualities that fit with your company culture. Action 3, bring your staff and customers along for the journey. A change in leadership can be stressful for your staff and may put your customer relationships and company culture at risk. Make sure you have a clear plan for managing this transition. Action 4, connect with other business owners and key advisors. Test your thinking against how they've approached succession planning. Speak to other 2nd and 3rd generation businesses to understand how they separated the family office from their business activities. The last action, regularly review your succession plan. As your business evolves, your succession plan will change too. Make succession planning part of an ongoing business strategy conversation with your leadership team and external advisors. Where to from here? Don't put off tomorrow what you can start talking about today. Start the planning early, lean on your advisors and succession experts. There are actions and consequences along the way. We know it can be complex. Reviewing potential acquirers and the strength of your management alongside self-due diligence with corporate structures and financial information, records and forecasts will support your journey. We always caution against making decisions in isolation, as there needs to be balance with people, legal, commercial, financial, and tax considerations. By involving your advisor to work alongside you and your business, balanced outcomes are achievable for the business and your family. We have really enjoyed this process of bringing the Radar results to this audience. We value not just the comments from the professionals within Pitcher Partners, but the response from middle market businesses sharing their views and reinforcing some of the conversations we are having every day with our clients. As advisors, we seek to look for ways to help you establish and navigate your own bespoke business succession plan in a meaningful way. So you've probably heard enough from Robert and I today, so we thought we might open up to our audience for questions.
Thanks, Kylie. We've got a few questions coming through, so I might throw the first one to Robert. We haven't heard from you for a little bit. Robert, was there anything that surprised you about succession planning in the Radar report?
Definitely. As I said, I view succession planning as a process, and so that slide that talked about the time frame and just how short it was, an average of 3.6 years being your time frame for your succession, and the 27% in the next 12 months. That's just an extraordinary amount of capital that could possibly be walking out the door or moving on somewhere else. So I found that a little bit disconcerting. But then even when I reflected back on our definition of succession planning, that cultivating of leadership, it's hard to know whether the responses were saying, yes, in the next 12 months, we are cultivating that leadership, or in the next 12 months, we're expecting leadership to move on, in which case we've got a problem. I like to think the positive, that we've already got things in place whereby we're trying to engage our existing staff and external leaders to build this business and allow maybe the owner to take a step back and just provide that external mentorship.
What about you, Kylie? Was that your thinking as well?
Yeah, I would definitely say the timeframes really surprised me. I was actually pleasantly surprised how many people had a succession plan in place. The question is I don't think it's something that should sit in the top drawer. I'd love to know how often people are bringing that conversation to the table with their advisors. I think that's really important.
Excellent. Okay, so another question that's come through. With such a big change of ownership on the horizon, what do you think will be the biggest impact on the business landscape? Kylie, maybe you want to take this one first.
I think change management. I think we're seeing it already in many of our clients, the technological advances, handling that. And also quite often the next generation, those that are exiting, they're not ready for they know how to look after a business, but they don't know how to look after their own personal wealth and investments. So I think if we look at that from that perspective, that's where I see the bulk of the challenges happening. Yeah.
And Robert, what do you think is the biggest impact on the business landscape?
Well, I think I kind of look at it in terms of innovation is going to drive a lot of this. And one of the biggest problems that we're seeing out there within the workforce and certainly as part of the succession piece is productivity. How do we gain that productivity as we're handing over to the next generation? Because my concern is you've been running a business or involved in business for 30, 40 years. That is a lot of intellectual property that walks out the door, right? And it doesn't have to walk out the door. I've still got clients in their 80s that are involved in business because it comes down to that piece of what else do I do? Yes, you can manage your own money, but you're normally better off putting in the hands of a professional. But there's only so much golf and fishing you can do. So having an interest and I refer to as keeping the grey matter busy is quite important. So I think you'll find that we will find that there's going to be older business owners around that are still positively contributing to what's going on.
Well, that's a good segue to the next question is, what are the signs that a business needs to start succession planning immediately? I mean, Robert, you mentioned the age of the owner. What else?
Well, I think if I look at triggers, age is one of them, but I'm actually going to refer to a quote from Gavin de Bono in our Melbourne office, and he was effectively said in the Radar report that succession is not always about an end. It's often the start of something new. And so, we look at those triggers of being a change in business strategy, new ideas, then, that conversation really should be happening now, right? Because it does take time to implement, it does take time to cultivate people. I'm not sure I quite answered your question there, but I'll hand over to you, Kylie.
Yeah, I think efficiency and how technology is going to drive that is going to be really critical. For many of our clients or aging clients that have had businesses that have just run seamlessly, if we just look back at the change that's happened in the last 5 years and how fast that's going to fast track over the next 10, it is quite scary. Now, they're not going to get there unless they can turn around and gain efficiencies with it because it's not something that they're familiar with. So bringing in new blood and new energy, that's the way that they'll achieve it.
Okay. One of the questions we've got, which I think would be, Kylie, perhaps this might be something that you'd like to respond to. What kinds of things can leaders do after they hand over the reins that will help their business legacy?
Look, I think as a business owner, going back and visiting, I mean, as Robert alluded to before, you just don't exit. Your business identity and your personal identity is so intertwined. I know even in our own practice here, we love to see our founding partners walk through the doors. And if I reflect on something that is common in all of my private clients, I would say it's having someone hold their hand, perhaps having an independent advisory board that's there to support them through those challenges. Um, there is a level of business maturity that's needed. People can read things a different way. So whilst everything's going on in the new age world and moving forward, you do still need a little bit of that old to help centre the business going forward.
Robert, your thoughts on how business leaders can hand over the reins to help their legacy?
Well, mine's kind of contradictory just to myself with what I'm about to say. Part of it is to let go. I was with a business owner just yesterday and he's transitioning out, but he doesn't know how to let go. And so every time he goes in there, he creates a problem because while they're trying to implement change, he doesn't accept that change, even though it's no longer his business, right? So knowing when to let go is really important in helping the next generation come through. I agree with Kylie's point, though, that mentorship of an external group and coming in, you've got that history there and you understand your clients, you understand the market better than probably anyone else. And when you sit with these older business owners, I have lunch with a group of gentlemen in their 80s every second month, and hearing them talk about their experiences is just mind-blowing, right? And I think as I get older, I've got more to contribute to the younger generation coming through just here within Pitcher Partners. And so I'm really active in trying to share that knowledge with them. And as Kylie said, and as I've seen, you will be missed, right? You've worked closely with these people for a long time. So, if you have the opportunity or you can create the opportunity, foster it to be able to go back in and say hello because it's good for your mental health as well.
It's funny, sorry, Meg. I do recall with the father and three sons, for those three sons who at that stage were really quite young in their career to transition over the next 10 years, they had looked back and reflected on what they needed to do to help dad get out of the business. So they then spent the last 5 years of when they had transitioned to their CEO, their CFO, their CMO, they actually forced themselves to make time and reconnect with their families and find those special projects. So then that way, when they did exit, they exit knowing that they had something else to move forward to. So yeah, I think that's a really good point you raised, Robert. Yeah.
I think we've got time for perhaps one or two more questions. Just on Robert's point about knowing when to let go, what are some of the other common pitfalls to avoid in succession planning?
Oh, not planning at all. I see it quite often. People come in and see me a year out from when they intend to retire and do something with their business and believe that we can work miracles. We look at the corporate structure they have, and there's loans between different entities that we need to unwind. They haven't identified potential successors, and don't rule with an iron fist. Develop a collaborative culture within your organisation. Because I said it before, people are everything. That culture you build can make it so much easier.
What about you, Kylie?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, it's what are some of the common pitfalls to avoid with succession planning?
So I think one of the ones that I have seen where clients have transitioned to me is a lack of insurance. So I'll give an example. Let's just say you've got a key person, they're planning on transitioning, but something happens to them. And if you don't have the right insurances in place, it's going to be really hard for that business to continue forward anyway, especially if there's no buy-sell agreements or anything like that. So I think planning for the unexpected and scenario planning as well. I think that can often be some of the pitfalls. We get very comfortable. We've had a great year. We'll have another great year. I think, things happen. COVID happened that took us all by surprise. You never know what's out there. And that's outside of the control of who you want to succeed it to. It could be environmental factors as well.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that, Kylie. We see that a lot with our agricultural clients where it is cyclical. You know, we're going through a period now where they're all having a great time and looks like being another fantastic season. But I keep reminding them, maybe it's because of my age and being around for a while, that we do have periods of 2-3 years where we will have a bad crop.
That's all the time we have for questions. So back to you, Robert.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening. I really hope you got some value out of today's session, and I appreciate you spending your time with us. We will be sharing a copy of this recording of the webinar and the slides of the presentation on Monday. As always, should you have any questions or wish to discuss today's session any further, please reach out to your usual Pitcher Partners contact. For more information and to stay up to date with everything Pitcher Partners, you can check out our Pitcher Partners website, LinkedIn or YouTube channel. I will finish from a quote from Kylie in today's presentation. I want you to go away and think about how to work on the business as opposed to in the business. Thank you and have a great day.